There is a shoe that has appeared in over 650 films. It was worn by the U.S. Army, by Olympic athletes, by Elvis Presley, by James Dean, by Kurt Cobain, by Dennis Rodman, by Sylvester Stallone in Rocky, by the 10th Doctor in Doctor Who. At its peak, and this is a real number, this shoe controlled 80% of the entire basketball footwear market on Earth. Not Nike, not Adidas, not any brand that exists with the same dominance today. A canvas shoe with a rubber toe, a circle patch on the ankle, and one man's signature printed on it. A shoe that was already 50 years old before Nike sold its first sneaker. A shoe that was already a cultural institution before Michael Jordan was born, and in January 2001, the company that made it filed for bankruptcy, $226 million in debt, the most recognizable shoe in American history. Bankrupt. That alone would be a strange enough story. But here's what makes it truly strange. The company that put it out of business, the one that grew so fast and so ruthlessly that Converse couldn't survive, is the same company that bought it. Nike killed Converse, then purchased its corpse for $305 million, and what happened after that is the part nobody fully talks about. Chuck Taylor never received a single cent in commission. Let that sit. The man whose name is on one of the most iconic shoes ever made, whose signature has appeared on over 800 million pairs, sold across more than a century, was paid a salary. Just a salary, no royalties, no licensing fees, no percentage of the billions generated by his name on that ankle patch. He drove across America for decades, living in motels, selling these shoes out of the trunk of his car, sleeping in roadside stops, spending Converse's expense account freely because it was the closest thing to ownership he would ever get. He died in 1969, 1 year after being inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. The year after Converse honored him, the same year the company he had built began to fall apart. Without him, the shoe still carries his name. It will carry his name forever. He received nothing for it beyond a paycheck. This is a story about a shoe that outlasted everyone who created it, everyone who built it, and every company that owned it. A shoe that is more powerful as a symbol than it ever was as a product. And a story about what happens when a brand doesn't understand the difference between those two things until it's too late. Walk into any store in 2026, a fashion boutique, a mall chain, a skateboard shop, an airport retailer, and you will find the Chuck Taylor All-Star, the same canvas upper, the same rubber toe cap, the same circle patch with Chuck Taylor's signature, the same silhouette that was introduced in 1917, 109 years old, essentially unchanged. Still selling. Converse generates over $2 billion in revenue annually as part of the Nike portfolio. The Chuck Taylor is one of the best-selling shoes in the history of footwear. More than 800 million pairs sold total. Some estimates put the number closer to 1 billion. On the surface, a beloved icon, a cultural artifact that survived everything: wars, bankruptcies, trend cycles, corporate acquisitions, and came out the other side still on shelves, still being laced up by teenagers who have never heard of. Marquis Mills Converse still being called simply Chucks by people who couldn't tell you who Chuck Taylor was. That's the surface. But underneath it is a more uncomfortable story. A story about a brand that had more market dominance than any shoe company has achieved since, and lost all of it. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in a slow, decades-long process of not understanding what it actually had. A story about a salesman who built a brand with his own hands and feet, literally, and received no share of what he created. A story about what it means for a shoe to be saved by the company that destroyed it, and a story about who makes the shoe now, and what that process actually looks like for the people doing the making. Malden, Massachusetts. Marquis Mills Converse is 47 years old when he opens the Converse Rubber Shoe Company. He's a manager from a footwear firm, practical, and unsentimental about what he's building. The early business is galoshes, rubber boots, winterized footwear, nothing remarkable. By 1915, the company shifts focus to athletic shoes. By 1917, Converse introduces the All-Star, a canvas high-top basketball shoe, one of the first shoes specifically designed for the sport. It sells, not explosively, but steadily. Then, in 1921, a semi-professional basketball player from Columbus, Indiana, walks into the Converse offices in Chicago. His name is Charles Hollis Taylor. He goes by Chuck. He's 20 years old. He plays for the Akron Firestones. He's not a star. He won't ever be famous for what he does on the court. He tells the Converse managers that their all-star shoe has a problem. His feet hurt when he wears it. He has specific ideas about what would make it better. More flexibility, more ankle, support, a different cut. They listen. Within a year, Converse has adopted his suggested improvements. They give Taylor a job as a salesman and brand ambassador. And then Chuck Taylor does something that no shoe company had ever thought to do before. He gets in a car and he drives. For decades, almost his entire working life, Chuck Taylor travels the United States, stopping at high schools, colleges, YMCAs, military bases, gyms, and sporting goods stores. He holds basketball clinics, he teaches the game, he introduces coaches to the All-Star, he builds relationships. He is not selling shoes with advertising. He is selling shoes with presence, with relationships, with a handshake and a basketball clinic in a gymnasium. And it works. By 1932, Chuck Taylor's name is added to the ankle patch of the shoe that carries his improvements, the first celebrity endorsed athletic shoe in history. He continues driving, he continues selling, he continues representing the brand in every gym in America. In 1936, Converse All-Stars become the official shoe of the U.S. Olympic team. They stay the official Olympic shoe until 1968. During World War II, the U.S. Army adopts Chuck Taylor All-Stars as the official athletic training shoe for all American troops. Every soldier in training, Chuck Taylor shoes. After the war, in 1949, Converse releases the classic black and white high top. Basketball is now a professional sport. The NBA has just formed from the merger of two competing leagues. The Chuck Taylor is the shoe of every team, every player, every serious athlete. By the mid-1950s, Converse controls 80% of the entire sneaker industry. Not just basketball shoes, all sneakers, 80%. Let that number anchor itself. Not even Nike at the height of the Jordan era came close to that kind of market share. No brand in the modern global sneaker market controls anything, near 80%. In 1957, the low-cut All-Star is introduced. More casual, more versatile, more visible outside basketball courts. Converse becomes the shoe of sports, yes, but also of schools, of everyday streets of American life. In 1968, Chuck Taylor is inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, the ambassador of basketball, the man who drove a country into loving this canvas shoe. 1 year later, in 1969, Chuck Taylor dies of a heart attack. And something breaks in Converse that never fully heals. Not immediately. The shoe is still everywhere, but the man who had been the living embodiment of its marketing, who had built every relationship, held every clinic, made every sale with, his own presence is gone. And the companies coming for Converse's market share are just getting started. The collapse of Converse is not a single event. It is a 20-year process of watching the world change and responding too slowly, too half-heartedly, or not at all. It begins in the 1970s. The sneaker industry is evolving rapidly. New companies are introducing leather uppers, high-tech cushioning, air cells, foam systems, pumps, shoes built around specific performance, science designed not just for the game, but for the body, mechanics of the people playing it. Basketball players are getting bigger, faster, and more physically demanding. Their feet need more from their shoes. The canvas All-Star, which had been mostly unchanged since 1922, can't keep up. Slowly, then quickly, NBA players stop wearing Chuck Taylors. The league that Converse had built its identity around, the sport that Chuck Taylor had devoted his life to promoting, begins choosing other brands. Nike is rising, Adidas is pushing, Puma has its moments. New Balance is finding its running audience, and Converse responds to all of this with colors. New colorways, more patterns, special editions. The shoe remains, functionally the same. A 50-year-old canvas design in a new shade of blue. This is not nothing. The colorways work for a specific audience. The counterculture, the musicians, the skaters, the artists, who have adopted the All-Star precisely because it's not the high-tech, high-performance, expensive shoe that serious athletes wear. Kurt Cobain wears them. The Ramones wear them. The counterculture. He adopts the Chuck Taylor as its uniform, not because it's the best shoe, but because it's the opposite of whatever Nike is selling this season. This matters. This audience is real, and it is loyal. But Converse makes a critical error. Instead of embracing this cultural shift, instead of saying, "We are no longer a basketball performance shoe. We are now the shoe of creative people, of artists, of the deliberately uncorporate." Converse tries to remain a performance basketball brand. They release new basketball models, the One Star, the Pro Leather, the Weapon. They sign NBA players. They try to compete with Nike in the space Nike is building specifically to destroy them. It doesn't work. And by the time they accept that the Chuck Taylor's future is cultural rather than athletic, the company has lost so much ground to Nike that recovery seems impossible. In the 1980s, Nike's Air Jordan arrives. Michael Jordan, the most powerful athlete endorsement in the history of consumer products. A shoe that doesn't just sell, it sells. An identity, a lifestyle, a mythology. Converse cannot compete with that. Not financially. Not culturally. Not with a canvas shoe designed in 1917. The 1990s bring ownership changes. Management changes. Strategic. Confusion. Multiple different companies and investment groups trying to figure out what Converse actually is and what direction it should go. None of them figure it out. Revenue continues to fall. On January 22, 2001, Converse files for bankruptcy. $26 million in debt. The most iconic shoe in American history. Bankrupt. There's an irony that sits in this moment that deserves to be named. Converse's greatest strength, the Chuck Taylor's unchanging design, was also the instrument of its destruction. The shoe that never changed couldn't compete in a market that was changing constantly. But the shoe that never changed is also the reason anyone still cared about Converse at all. The moment Converse tried to be something modern and performance-driven, it failed. The moment it accepted being the un-Nike, it found its people. It just took a bankruptcy to get there. April 2001. 3 months after the bankruptcy filing, a group of private investors called Footwear Acquisitions purchases Converse's assets from the bankruptcy proceedings. They restructure, they stabilize. The irony is immediate. Before Nike even enters the picture, the newly restructured Converse begins to grow. The retro sneaker market is exploding. Teenagers who grew up watching their parents wear Chuck Taylors are now buying them for themselves, not for basketball, but for identity, for the look, for the authenticity that comes from wearing something that hasn't changed since before their grandparents were born. Revenue goes from $149 million in 2001 to $205 million in 2002. A 37% increase. The brand is recovering. Then Nike makes its move. In July 2003, Nike purchases Converse from Footwear Acquisitions for $305 million. The announcement is careful. Nike says Converse is one of the strongest footwear brands in the world with great heritage. Nike promises to give Converse the marketing depth and distribution network to push globally. What Nike actually wants is specific, and an analyst named Robert Toomey says it plainly at the time. Nike was probably looking to cash in on the popularity of retro shoes. Retro styling has come back so strong, a lot, stronger than I would have expected. And there is something else, something the analysts say more. Quietly, Nike has approximately 40% of the U.S. athletic shoe market. It cannot grow much further in its own name because it already owns so much of the space. To expand, it needs brands that appeal to the people who specifically don't want Nike. Converse is the brand of people who don't want Nike. Nike buys Converse to own those people too. A sports marketing analyst named Hal Peterson says it directly. Nike is buying Converse to give it a lifestyle brand that will appeal to the anti-Nike crowd. It's the only way Nike can continue to expand. Think about what that means. The people wearing Converse because it feels like a rejection of Nike's corporate dominance. The artists, the punks, the skaters, the people who specifically want the not Nike shoe, are now buying a Nike product. They just don't know it. The Chuck Taylor still says Converse on the ankle. The brand still has its own stores, its own identity, its own marketing. But the money goes to Nike. The supply chain is Nike's. The distribution is Nike's. The strategic decisions are made by Nike executives in Beaverton, Oregon. The anti-Nike shoe is Nike. Under Nike's ownership, Converse grows significantly. Revenue climbs from $205 million in 2003 to $516 million by 2007. By 2018, it reaches over $1.8 billion. The global distribution network that Nike provides gives Converse access to markets it could never have reached alone. Nike also does something that proves its understanding of what it bought. It mostly leaves the Chuck Taylor alone. The shoe that has been basically unchanged since 1922 stays basically unchanged. Nike understands that the Chuck Taylor's power is its permanence. Its refusal to modernize is not a flaw to be fixed. It is the entire value proposition. The one exception to this is instructive. In 2015, Converse releases the Chuck Taylor 2, an updated version with Nike's Lunar Lawn cushioning inside, better padding, modern materials. The shoe looks almost identical to the original, but it's $10-20 more expensive. Consumers reject it, not because it's worse. By most technical measures, it's better, more comfortable, better supported. But people don't buy the Chuck Taylor for comfort. They buy it for what it means. The moment it becomes technically superior, it becomes something other than what it is. The Chuck Taylor 2 is discontinued within a year. The original Chuck Taylor continues unchanged. The lesson is profound and applies to almost every brand on this channel. Sometimes the product's value is entirely in its meaning, and the meaning is inseparable from the product, being exactly what it has always been. Improve it, and you destroy it. But Nike also does something that Converse had resisted for years. It moves all manufacturing out of the United States. Before the 2001 bankruptcy, Converse still made shoes in Lumberton, North Carolina. The Made in USA stamp on the heel was real. American workers, American factories, American production. After the bankruptcy, even before Nike arrives, production had already moved to Asia to cut costs. Nike confirms and expands this. Converse shoes are now made in China, Vietnam, India, and Indonesia. The Made in USA stamp disappears forever. As one analyst noted, buying Converse represented, to many customers, a desire to support American labor rather than Asian sweatshops. Under Nike's control, the bad news is they will never move production back to the U.S. He was right. The Chuck Taylor All-Star is assembled in contract factories across Asia, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, India among them. The factories operate under Nike's Code of Conduct, the same compliance framework that covers all Nike-owned brands. Audits are conducted, standards are set, supplier lists are published annually. The shoe itself is simple by athletic footwear standards. Canvas upper, rubber sole, vulcanized construction. But that simplicity does not mean the work is simple. Cutting canvas to precise dimensions, stitching seams that must align exactly with the iconic silhouette that has remained, unchanged for a century, attaching the rubber sole through vulcanization, placing the circle patch, Chuck Taylor's signature, in exactly the right position on every shoe. These workers are skilled. The precision required to maintain the consistency of a design that millions of people recognize immediately and would notice if anything was off is significant. The workers doing this are predominantly in Vietnam and Indonesia. They work in large contract factories, not owned by Nike or Converse, but operated to their specifications. Wages are governed by local minimums. Production pressure is constant. The economics of a $60–$80 canvas shoe with a century-old design leave little room in the margin for dramatically higher labor costs. Here is the specific irony that belongs to Converse and no other brand. The Chuck Taylor All-Star became the shoe of the working class, of the counterculture, of the people who couldn't afford the expensive performance shoe, or who deliberately refused it. Dennis Rodman said it. Growing up in Texas, I wore Chuck Taylors till they fell off. I was poor, I had nothing, but I felt like I had something in those shoes. The shoe of poverty and dignity and refusal and art and authenticity is made in a contract factory in Vietnam or Indonesia by workers whose wages place them in economic conditions not unlike the conditions of the people who chose the shoe because it was cheap enough to afford. The shoe of the poor is made by the poor. The brand of the working class is produced by the global working class, and the profits go to Nike, the largest athletic shoe company in the world. Why do people still buy Converse? Not out of habit, not because it's the best shoe available. The Chuck Taylor is objectively less comfortable than almost every other shoe in a similar price range. Canvas is not an advanced material. The cushioning is minimal by modern standards. People buy it for what it means, and what it means is something that almost no other brand achieves: genuine cultural neutrality. The Chuck Taylor has been worn by athletes, soldiers, artists, musicians, punks, skaters, film characters, teenagers, celebrities, and ordinary people across more than 100 years. It belongs to no single tribe. You can wear it as a statement of counterculture, or as a statement of retro nostalgia, or as a pure style choice, or because it's affordable, or because your favorite musician wore them, or because they come in a color that matches nothing else you own. The shoe absorbs meaning rather than imposing it. This is rare. Most brands work hard to create a specific identity that tells you what wearing the shoe means. Converse has accidentally created a shoe that means whatever the wearer wants it to mean. That is the Chuck Taylor superpower, and it explains why. It survived a bankruptcy, a corporate acquisition, decades of neglect, and still sells $1 billion worth of canvas shoes annually. But there is a tension in that superpower that nobody at Converse or Nike has fully resolved. Part of what the Chuck Taylor means to people who choose it deliberately is that it's not corporate, not calculated, not a product of a marketing machine. It feels like something that happened organically, a shoe that became a cultural icon because people chose it, not because a brand told them to. That feeling is now owned by the largest sportswear corporation in the world. The anti-corporate shoe is a corporate product. The Rebel shoe is owned by the establishment. The shoe that people choose because it isn't Nike is Nike. Whether that contradiction ultimately matters to the people. Buying Chucks depends on how much they want to know. Most of them have chosen not to look. Chuck Taylor never got a commission. 800 million pairs sold. His name on every one. His signature on every ankle patch. His suggestions in the design of the shoe that has been mostly unchanged for a century. He got a salary and free use of the company expense account, and a motel room somewhere in America every night, and the satisfaction of building something he believed in. He died without significant wealth. The shoe made billions. He received none of it. This is not ancient history. It is the founding logic of the brand, that the person whose labor and creativity and presence made everything possible did not share proportionally in what that labor created. That logic continues today in a different form. The workers in Converse's supply chain, in the contract. Factories in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in China, perform skilled, precise, physically demanding work. They ensure that every canvas seam aligns, that the rubber sole bonds correctly, that the circle patch sits at exactly the right angle on the ankle, that the shoe that comes off the production line matches the shoe that has come off the production line for 100 years. Their work is what makes the consistency possible, and the consistency is everything. It is the entire value of the Chuck Taylor. The shoe's magic is that it looks exactly the same as it has always looked. That magic is maintained by human hands under fluorescent lights in factories where Nike's compliance managers conduct periodic audits. The workers do not share in the cultural meaning of the shoe they make. They do not know that the pair they assembled today will be worn by someone who chose it as a statement of authenticity, of counterculture, of refusal. They know the assembly process. They know the production target. They know their wages. The gap between what the shoe means, freedom, authenticity, art, rebellion, working-class dignity, and the conditions of its production is wide and consistent with every other brand in this industry. Nike is not uniquely bad in this regard. The compliance framework is real. The audits happen. The code of conduct exists. But Chuck Taylor's story, a man who got nothing for what he built, is not just the origin of the brand. It is also a template that the manufacturing system still follows. The people who make the value don't share in the value. The name on the shoe is not the person in the factory. The meaning attached to the canvas is not available to the hands that stitch the canvas. That gap is the quiet truth beneath the most iconic shoe in American history. In 1921, Chuck Taylor walked into the Converse offices with sore feet and an opinion about how to make a shoe better. They gave him a job. He spent the rest of his life driving across America, living in motels, running clinics, building relationships, selling shoes one gym at a time. He never owned anything. He never received a commission. He died having put his name on what would become one of the most recognizable objects in modern history. The shoe outlasted him. It outlasted Marquis Mills Converse. It outlasted every owner and investor and corporate strategist who tried to change it, save it, improve it, or profit from it. It outlasted the company that made it twice, and it's still here. That design, the canvas upper, the rubber toe, the circle, patch with a dead man's signature, has not significantly changed in over 100 years. The people who wear it today are connected through that unchanged object to every soldier, every basketball player, every artist, every counterculture kid, every poor child with nothing but a feeling of having something in those shoes. Nike owns all of that now. The anti-Nike shoe, the rebel shoe, the shoe that cost $305 million because the people who refused to buy Nike kept buying it. All of it owned, branded, distributed, and manufactured within the same global corporate system that produces the Air Max and the Jordan and the Pegasus. The shoe that never changed now belongs to the company that has changed everything around it. Whether that is salvation or the final irony is a question Chuck Taylor cannot answer. His signature is still on the shoe. He still gets nothing for it.